This week, America lost one of its sweethearts, Dolly Parton. And we thought, John and I, that this would be a great opportunity not only to think about the impact that she had in our culture, but also to talk about the age-old topic of grief and how we handle it. Hey, welcome to Valley Chat. I'm Pastor Scott Seidler with Pastor John Karolus. And as many of you know, at least if you're in the world, Dolly Parton died at the age of 80 years old after a brief stint with cancer. And I know that while not all of us were Dolly Parton fans, Pastor John Karolus included, as we were planning this conversation, but my 19-year-old son, Connor, loves Dolly Parton. And like all day yesterday, it was in the Seidler household a constant stream of Dolly Parton related grief. And so today I thought a couple things we could do is we could ask the question, what is it about Dolly Parton that has basically galvanized the country in an experience of shared grief? Even President Trump ordered the flags to be lowered to half staff for a week in honor of the contributions that Dolly Parton has made in film, in song, in culture. And so, John, this is a setup question, and you can just run out of the room right now as I ask it. But for your 30-plus-year-old self, what does Dolly Parton mean to you, if anything at all?
Well, I would start out with saying, when you list me as a non-fan of Dolly Parton, it's not that I'm not a fan of Dolly Parton.
It's going to be good.
But that I just don't know her music and have not been sort of impacted directly by her contributions to the music industry and to theater and to film. Indirectly, I'm sure we all have. And so the collaboration she did with pop artists and country artists of our current era, those were definitely noticeable things that took the internet and the world by storm as they happened. And so the texts I received yesterday about her passing and the sadness that was truly being communicated in them, it's a big deal. And it's something significant when our culture goes through the loss of someone. I remember last year we lost a number of celebrity level people, and there was sort of from figures who were significant in music to movie stars to influential speakers and political voices. There just was a lot of loss, and it was an interesting thing to go through that as a culture and as a country. And now this year, Dolly Parton passing, and the level of transcendence she had over industry specifics, over political divides, over religious differences, pretty significant. And so,
yeah, her Christian faith was an unapologetic part of her DNA. I mean, her family said, in the announcement of her death, we're thankful that she is with Jesus right now. Her Christian faith was something that inspired her. And I think that is part of the reason, at least for me as a Christian, we lost a good one. She was certainly a celebrity, and yet she conducted herself in her marriage, in her life, in such a way that I really felt like her Christian faith could be seen in the way she was living her life. And for as much as this world is consumed with all kinds of celebrities, it's like, oh man, all the scandals, all the character flaws and deficiencies. Dolly was like what kind of held America together in like a hopeful way when you think of celebrities. So I think that's part of it, is like, she was good. You go to Dollywood, you go to the Dollywood Stampede. I mean, we went there with our children. You go to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. There's just a lot of good family-oriented, hometown kind of quality to Dolly Parton. But we are grieving, and that's really where we want to kind of segue to, which is this idea of grief, and especially communal grief. So, John, talk a little bit about that angle of this podcast.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how most people talk about grief and their experience of it as if there is just sort of an expected amount of time that things should take. And whether that be a personal loss, a family loss, a community loss, or an entire culture's loss, those same sort of assumptions apply. And then we run into the problem that the timelines aren't lining up with my process.
Right.
And my grief isn't seeming to be consistent in its decrease over time. There seems to be certain things that trigger spikes of emotional response, or just, sort of losing my breath or losing my focus because of something or someone that reminds me of this person I miss, situations and things that maybe in the moment we don't even think about. And then 6 months down the road, realize that mattered to us as well. And so grief is complicated.
Yeah.
And public grief takes on a complicated level of its own, because we're missing the same person, but we're all missing that person in a different way.
Right.
And so it becomes a significant spiritual issue, I think, for spiritual communities, for pastors, for leaders in homes as well. How are we going to make it through this?
Right.
And how does that also give insight into how we make it through the losses we face in our own personal lives?
Yeah. And I didn't know Dolly, but I'd never met her in my life. 9 to 5, the movie, saw her in 9 to 5, the movie. How many times did I listen to Kenny Rogers and Dolly sing Islands in the Stream while I was bowling at Echo Lanes in Morris, Illinois in 1983? Honest to God, that is a kind of core memory for Scott Seidler.
You feel like she knew you.
I did.
You didn't know her.
I did. I mean, Islands in the Stream. That is what we are, John. That is what we are. Nowhere in between. Anyways, so the larger point, though, is sometimes grief is we miss the person. Like I miss my mom and dad, and I spent time with my mom and dad. But then there is the other side of grief. We miss the value that person brings into my life, or the values that they represent. And that's really the nature of public grief. I didn't know Dolly Parton. I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I didn't know fill in the blank, but I knew the values that they represented, which I believed were in some ways, different ways, valuable for this world in which I'm living, raising my kids and grandkids. And so grief in a public setting invites the question, what is lost with Dolly's passing? What is lost with this other person's passing, this person's passing? And then the follow-up question is, how do I help carry on and contribute positively the very thing that I'm mourning the loss of? I think that's just a critical kind of life application question.
I think that's a great point, because what's missing, or what you feel like is missing, is I'm no longer going to be impacted by the new things that particular influence was creating and putting into the world.
Right.
And so I may discover some previous things, but there's nothing new that I'm going to find or come across.
Right.
And so being able to participate in the way that figure, take Dolly and your experience in growing up in a small town and becoming who you are today,
right.
and knowing that just as you were impacted in such a powerful way by a song playing on the speakers of a bowling alley, right? Now you can carry that into your interactions with other people, and they may never be able to draw that connection themselves between you and the bowling alley.
Yeah.
But because of that connection, you've had an impact on their lives as well. I think too, there's something about living in a very exposed culture like we do, where everything is public. You almost can't keep anything completely to yourself unless you are literally hiding it under a rock, under the floorboards, under the cabin in the woods, right? Otherwise, it's out there.
Right.
And so then there comes this pressure where, am I allowed to actually go through the feelings I'm having? Am I allowed to miss somebody I never knew? Am I allowed to not be moving on as quickly as others? And so hopefully this conversation is an encouragement for someone questioning that about themselves, to know that, yes, it's a completely human thing to have your own timeline, progress, and sort of journey through the stages of grief, which may be an observable thing, but I think there's a lot of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of progress on the stages of grief. And so it does, a public situation does always awaken in me private, personal grief, I should say. Family members that maybe really did love Dolly and listen to her music all the time,
Right.
or just someone like that. I'm thinking about people in my life who are older than she is,
Right.
people that I love, people that I treasure, and thinking about how not a day is guaranteed.
That's
and
right.
So, trying to really appreciate what God has blessed me with.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I think in my family, my dear sister Sue, I mean, the grief that she experienced when Elvis died with all of his warts, flaws, and deficiencies, spiritual speaking and otherwise. I mean, it just went on and on. And 30 years later, hey, you want to go visit Graceland on the, X anniversary of Elvis's death? No, I'm good, Sue. I'm really good. I'm not missing Elvis a whole lot, And grief will lessen, grief will pass, but that's for me the interesting point right now is like, and I think, and so from a mission work, like making a connection on behalf of the gospel, that's my question. What is it about Dolly? That's my question I'm asking people. What is it about Dolly that, really touched you? Like my 19-year-old, I'm going to ask my son Connor when I get a chance to talk with him. Connor, what was it about Dolly that you at 19 years old, literally 61 years younger than her, but at random points, Connor would have Dolly playing on, the speakers in our house, and we're singing Jolene, and I'm asking the question, why are we singing Jolene with an 18-year-old? That just doesn't make sense. But, he's an eclectic kid. He's got a lot of musical tastes across a lot of different genres, and Dolly was one of them. What is it about Dolly Parton that, so attracted you that causes you now to kind of participate in this public mourning? When we ask those kinds of diagnostic questions and then listen for the answer, it allows us to ask the greater question, how does God, in his perfection, in his grace and his love, how does he exceed even the virtue that Dolly Parton or others might have represented? And that is then fertile ground for a great conversation, and it doesn't have to be, let's talk about Jesus, at a super intense level, but it just may give you an insight into that person's spiritual, dimension.
And like a concrete example of what that could look like. If someone's wondering, well, how could I actually grieve with someone and share the hope that I have for the eternal future with God that I carry in my heart with someone who may or may not have that same hope?
Right.
And I think it could look something like this. You asked the question, what is it about Dolly? And I just think about how you connected it immediately to this foundational, formative piece of your life. Right. Bowling regularly, the song playing.
I know.
I can picture my bowling alley, and I can picture the songs playing at that time, and much, much newer. And
I'm aware. I'm now interested to find out what those songs were.
And the feeling that she knew you. The feeling that this person who you'd never met, who maybe never even pictured her music being played in a bowling alley in Morris, Illinois, somehow connected with you in a way that related to you.
Yeah. I grew up rural. I grew up on a crick. I grew up wearing denim, not having a lot of clothes, not having, all the toys of living in urban, suburban. I know you're the same from Anago. And, I think for me, as I just reflect on it, is Dolly was a person who could come into Morris, Illinois and fit right in.
Yeah.
Fit right in. And we would not feel out of place with her celebrity because of her West Virginia, Eastern Tennessee upbringing and all of that just down-home character.
And I think that opens the door of just the possibility of, the concept of God as this intimidating, distant, just imminent kind of pressurized sort of stereotype. And when you walk with Jesus a little bit, you start to come to realize that there's this relatability, that he'd be at home in Morris, Illinois, that he'd be at home at your dinner table and just wanting to be with you.
Yeah.
And that understanding how we can have that experience with this celebrity-like figure, I think helps us realize, maybe I do believe there is this possibility that the creator of all things may actually want to know me and love me too.
Well, and, and I grew up in a time, I grew up in a time. I grew up in a time, where we had, a school-sponsored worship service before graduation, and so church was a big part of our life in Morris, and that Christian faith found a consistent expression in Dolly's life. And so my point is that it's not just like, wow, she wears denim and she speaks with a little bit of an accent and calls a creek a crick. It's that the whole package of what she presented and what by all accounts was the integrity of her person really fit with at least my upbringing. And so I think that kind of, to your point, overlap really does make a difference, and it explains a lot of grief. But there's other values that she represented that is portable into urban and suburban communities, north, south, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
anyhow. Yeah. Hey, grief is tough. And when we miss people that a lot of people miss alongside us, that can make it a little bit easier. It can make it a little bit harder. We hope that when you're going through a time of loss and a time of difficulty, you know that Shepherd is a community that wants to walk with you through that as well. We want to support you as pastors in navigating grief, but we also want you to know that this whole family of faith that's striving to connect with you, even in the season of grief, does so fueled by and completely informed by the promises of Jesus. And so you're welcome to grieve with us, and you're welcome to grieve here. And we look forward to talking to you next time on Valley Chat.
Love it.